back to you.
Good evening, everybody. Afternoon. It's February 8th, and this is the regular meeting of the Public Works and Finance Committee. On my right, Walter Steed. On my left, Catherine Bonzo. Gary Riedner representing the city. First up on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from January 25th.
And I would recommend approval.
Good to you?
So moved.
Okay, they are approved. Next up is the disbursement report for January of this year. Gary,
Thank you.
Finance Director, temporary,
For what
pro
it's
tem.
worth. Which means that I'm just the front man for the people who do the work down there. But Sarah Banks is here, our accounting manager, to answer any particular questions. But you've got the disbursement report in front of you. Be happy to answer any questions that you might have. I know that our previous finance director, we went through each of the numbers, which was something that I was approached by some folks indicating that they didn't need to have the numbers read to them if they're already in the report. So it's really up to you. Otherwise, we would submit it as, or present it as submitted, excuse me.
Any thoughts, Walter?
I have no questions.
And only thing I did was send an email saying that it should have my name on it instead of Wayne.
Yes, and we just changed that.
Yes, great. So that was it.
So-
I looked through the whole thing.
If that's okay, there it is.
Okay, if it looks good, we'll sign off on that and proceed down to the first quarter financial report from October 1st to December 31st of 2015.
Okay, and this report, the quarterly financial report, is required by law to be sent out. We, of course, with the transition of our finance director downstairs, we were a little late in getting that out. However, it was given to the paper in time, so what we're looking for at this point is the approval of the city council. It's done. Thank you very much. As I indicated, as set out by law, you look at the percentages. 25% is what we're targeting, but as all in most of our funds, they're cyclical depending on when construction is being done, projects being pursued, so on and so forth. Our revenues, of course, are very dependent on when we get the billing for water, for instance. You have your billings that are flat during the times when the meters can't be read. That will have some adjustment at the end of that period. We get our main taxes in January and July or August, so residual second half taxes. So you'll see blips then, but otherwise everything looks like it's running just about where it needs to at this point. So I'd answer any questions that you might have. I know Walter contacted Sarah to get some particulars, and I think he got his questions answered. So happy to take a shot at anything else you got.
Anything, Walter?
No.
Catherine?
I didn't have anything.
Okay. We'll recommend approval of that report then.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
That was easy for you. You
That
didn't have to
was.
say a word.
Painless.
You holding up okay?
Oh, yeah. Things are great.
Next up is the renewal of the intermodal transit center lease with Smart Transit.
Okay. The intermodal transit center lease that you have before you is, we have submitted to the city attorney. City attorney has presented an amendment page, which essentially takes the previous agreement, which was a 3-year agreement, continues on for an additional term of 5 years with one renewal period. One of the things that we look at with this, are there any changes that have been made to the building or anything since that time? There have been not any changes made. There is an escalator provision within the agreement that allows for increases in the rent in order to meet cost of living adjustments or CPI adjustments using a national standard. So with that, we're just looking to get it renewed. I would note that this expired as of September 30th of 2015. We continued it month to month. Frankly, just was not on our radar at the time. Renewed it. We did implement the scheduled increase with the CPI, so that has been done. And Smart Transit is willing to renew and take it to their board. One of the questions that came up had to do with the required insurance under the lease, presenting an accord declarations page from Smart Transit. Again, thank Walter for that inquiry. So just received that, and we are a certificate holder for Smart Transit, so that's going to the city clerk. Before it was just sent over generally, so I've made arrangements today to have that sent to the city clerk, and every renewal, we will get that renewed certificate.
Walter?
Gary, we're not only renewing this 4 months after it expired, we actually signed the previous lease 2 years after it was enacted. Do we need a deck of index cards or something to try to keep up with this? Maybe this is too close a relationship to worry about it or something. I don't know why. It seems to be, it appears to be done fine. It seems to be all okay. I even talked to finance today to confirm that we're not only getting paid monthly, we're getting paid the escalator clause.
Yeah.
But we signed the September 30, 2012 lease on April 18 of 14, and now we've got the renewal coming up. We're getting better.
Well, we're getting better. And again, I really got no excuse for that except to say that the ITC, with the ground lease with the University of Idaho, the extended lease with the parking and transportation services at the U of I, smart lease, or lease with Smart Transit, the lease with CTAI, which since CTAI doesn't have any personnel anymore, that's gone away. It's been fairly complex. All I can say is that after construction, everybody moved in, everybody was paying the rent, we were just derelict in getting it done.
But it was brought to council in a timely fashion originally, and we
Yes.
approved it. It just wasn't executed.
Yeah, and I believe there was,
I went back and looked in the minutes.
yeah, I believe what happened, if I recollect right, it was sent out, well, Bill may have a better recollection than I do, so before he contradicts me, I'll let him.
Yeah.
Just my recollection of the activities at the time was the original lease that was executed by RPT, or Smart Transit, was lost. So we actually reproduced it and signed it. So we had transmitted a copy to RPT, they had signed it, but then somehow in the transfer of it coming back to the city, it was either displaced or lost in some fashion, so we had to go back, reconstruct, and re-sign a new copy of the lease.
And that was my recollection as well, that it had been submitted timely, but for some reason wasn't executed.
Now, you mentioned we have other tenants over there.
Yes.
One is the University for Parking Services. Is that the only other one?
Yes, CTAI has, since, doesn't have any employees, so we do have an available office. We haven't tried to lease that out to anyone at this point. There may be something that goes on there in the near future, but we haven't done anything with
Do
it.
you know the status of the University of Idaho parking lease?
This has caused me to take a look at it, but I'll have a report on that in the future.
Okay.
Okay, so what do you think? Shall we recommend the approval of the First Amendment to the lease agreement?
I would propose putting it through the consent.
Yep, so consent agenda, please.
Okay.
Okay, onward. Next, we have a series of reports, starting with the roll cart usage and storage. Fun stuff. Tim,
Good afternoon.
the never-ending saga of the roll carts.
Yeah.
Wow, congrats,
yes.
we got a first week done.
Yes,
That's a good thing.
yes, pretty positive too. We have had some concerns arise due to the safety notices that have been stamped on the new roll carts, the recycling carts, and I'd like to step back and just say that the larger carts, the 65s and 95s, were also stamped with that same warning when we started the garbage collection roll cart program. I'll just read that notice, and I did write this down so I wouldn't get it wrong, but it says on the sides of the carts, it says, "For outdoor use only, fire code prohibits use or storage within 5 feet of buildings." That was put on those carts at the request of our fire marshal. Joe Williams at the time, back in 2013, before we implemented the roll cart program. It's my understanding that the International Fire Code, which the city has adopted, states that any container over 40 gallons, this restriction would cover. Our fire folks are here to speak to that.
Half of them.
Half of
The
them.
other
One
one
of
just
them left.
Because this is a topic of some concern, because not within 5 feet of a structure means that in a lot of the higher density neighborhoods in town, the cart is going to be sitting in the middle of the driveway or in the front yard or something.
Not to mention that most places will have a number of carts now, too.
Yeah.
If I may, we asked the city attorney and the fire chief to take a look at this along with Tim, so if we could invite them to the table, we might be able to get your questions answered.
I hope so. That would be great.
That we can answer other people that are asking us questions.
There you go.
Sure.
That's the weird thing.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, we're getting asked about
Hi,
this on
Rod.
the street.
You want to start this one?
Well, sure. I went over this with Joe Williams, the fire marshal. And if you look at the International Fire Code, what we adopted, I think it was the 2012 edition, it does talk about large containers in there. It specifically says on there that not to be used for indoor use if you're going to have certain things, and it does specify things like oily rags or anything that can spontaneous combust. So that was the biggest concern. Also, the material of these cans are made out of a plastic that could be susceptible to fire. So they might have been a little concerned about the possibility of somehow if fire got into these or got close to something that they can melt and they would just contribute to the fire. I think the issue that Joe was worried about was people that put in the hot coals from their grill, and it caused a fire on one or two of these have melted down. So that was, I think, the biggest concern
In Moscow?
in Moscow. I don't think the structure burned down, but the actual cans were actually
In a
destroyed.
garbage can in Moscow.
Yeah, we've had a number.
just had one?
Well, we've had two over the course of this past winter, and I don't know exactly what was put in it. I'm assuming that someone cleaned out a barbecue, cleaned out a wood stove, pellet stove. The ashes weren't completely out. It got into the garbage can, and the side melted out of the garbage can.
So that's one of the concerns about these containers. But then I asked the fire chief, if somebody took an empty 65 or 90 gallon and put it in their garage, would it be safe? And he said, yeah, there's nothing really going to happen to it unless fire or heat source got to it. And I said, well, if they also have it inside their garage and they use it just for what they're supposed to recycle. And he said, yeah, that would not be a problem. It would be safe as long as it's used as it's supposed to be used. Their concern was people sometimes put things in there, like cigarette butts or something else that could actually cause a fire. But there shouldn't be an issue with these containers if they're used properly and it's put in with
So these
recycled
containers
material.
are different material than when people normally had their own garbage cans that they bought before? Is this a different plastic?
Could be.
No, it's either, most of these containers are either made out of a high density or a medium density polyethylene plastic, which is a hydrocarbon-based mix. I know that some of the manufacturers do use an amount of fire retardant in that mix. I don't know all of the specifics on it, but it would be no different than going down to Tri-State and buying a Rubbermaid can. Same material.
It's just, you would just know about these is because the city saw them. That's what it is. So people could be disposing of their hot coals before. It's just we didn't have record of them doing it.
Right.
Well, no, before we were limited to a 32 or 36 gallon container.
And it wouldn't have applied for that size of
So
a
if you went
container.
to Tri-State and bought a garbage can 4 years ago, in fact, we actually stopped them because they were selling a size that was greater than what the ordinance allowed.
Walmart was, I believe.
Walmart
yeah.
was, back when they were hand dumped.
Yeah.
But now that we've gone to the mechanically dumped totes, they are larger. So it's not exactly it's the same material, but it's a different, it's a larger container. But that doesn't mean that I want us to tell people you got to put them 5 feet out in the yard.
Now, this was a situation when we originally looked at the containers and they started gaining in size. That's when the fire marshal indicated that caused concern. I think you make a good point that if it's below 36 gallons, it can be, or below 40 gallons, whatever it is.
40.
Below 40 gallons, it isn't restricted. Above 40 gallons, it is restricted. The same stuff goes into both garbage cans. Nobody's going to say, I'm not putting it in that one because it's less than 40 gallons, or that one because it's more than 40. So, which is typical of legislation that is intended to meet the needs of, maybe the fire code folks thought that the 42 or 40 gallon and above was going to be used for commercial or whatever. But as I think these three gentlemen are saying, that it is the stuff you're not supposed to throw in it that isn't allowed in the garbage anyway that you shouldn't be putting in these cans.
So then,
But based
how do you get,
Wait.
because you have those things listed on the side, then how do we answer to people that are asking us about that cautionary, you can't put them in there, so we should give them this? Is that what we say to them? Or are you going to print that someplace? Or?
I don't know the answer to that.
So this is kind of turning into a conundrum about how to enable sensible, appropriate use, but at the same time keep the legal bases covered, especially as far as the fire code. Walter?
two things. One, based upon misuse of a household item, we ought to require all sofas that might get a cigarette in them to be put out in the yard and used out there as well. So with that,
You proposing that?
no, what I am proposing is to ask our gentleman here, can we, the city of Moscow, change that part of the International Fire Code that we have adopted?
If we were going to amend the code, we could be a little more restrictor, but we couldn't be less. So if the
Right, because it's the international code.
International Fire Code, we could require things to be more, put more restrictions on it, but we couldn't release some of those.
As the code's been adopted
As the code's been
by the
adopted.
state.
Yes, exactly. And the real issue was talking about the spontaneous ignition. What I think stuck out to the fire marshal, it says materials susceptible to spontaneous ignition such as oily rags. And I don't think the logical conclusion would mean that they specifically said certain things. They didn't say prohibit anything in those things. It said things that are susceptible to spontaneous combustion, things like the oily rags. So it didn't say that if you throw an aluminum can in there that's going to be an issue.
Gary?
It may be possible to, without calling the cans back in and rebranding them, it may be possible, and it might be a good, have these gentlemen work on something. You might be able to do a campaign that indicates, look, if you're going to store oily rags in these things, they must be 5 feet or more from your house. If you're not going to store oily rags in them, then they could be stored. There's no prohibition. There's a way you could do that.
So focus on the use aspect.
And the issue, though, is that they're hot stamped that they must not be within 5 feet of a building. Now, again, if we've made a mistake here and we've interpreted the code too literally, it's going to fail on the side of safety. Mm-hmm. It isn't saying, okay, always have them in there, even if you are storing oily rags. So in my mind, we've got the better part of the conundrum, if you will, or the dilemma, and that is that we might be able to run an educational campaign where we talk about, okay, this is what the reasonable interpretation is. However, this is what you must do if you're going to store oily rags in these
Or
things.
other
Or other
compounds
combustible
susceptible to
material.
spontaneous
Plus,
combustion.
it's not a bad idea, if I may, it's not a bad idea. If we've already had 2 plastic cans melt over the last year or so from people putting hot ashes, coals, whatever in them, it's probably not a bad idea to run an educational campaign about what should go in a garbage can and what shouldn't.
Well, I also recall the occasional balcony wooden balcony on student housing that tends to go up in smoke from inappropriately extinguished cigarette butts.
You bet.
And those seem to happen with some regularity, but somehow we've gotten around banning wooden balconies.
We have.
So when you think about educating them, what would you like to see? What would you like to see? Would you like to have some language on there that you add to people to stick on their can, or do you want to just put it into the newsletter? But I kind of thought you could make you could have a label.
Sticker.
They tend to peel off those things because they're
They would.
designed not to have stuff stuck to them or
But you could put
graffiti
them out
paint.
yearly. I mean, there's a way to, until you educate your population.
If I may, my suggestion would be if these gentlemen could put their heads together, come up with some proposed resolution. I think the sticker situation might be a good resolution. It might be a publicity campaign or an educational campaign, a special Talking Trash newsletter perhaps, something like that, and propose that, bring that back, and the council could then make a recommendation based on that.
Walter.
But we've told them they can't put them in their garages. We've told them they have to be 5 feet out. How do we reverse that?
We're not reversing, we're amending.
No, you can't amend it because he says the law doesn't allow you to amend it.
We're clarifying.
I get what you're saying, but I think what Rod is saying is the specific prohibition was if you are going to store things like oily rags and combustibles, then you must have it no less than 5 feet away. If you're going to, the corollary of that is if you're not going to put that sort of thing in there, then you don't have to have it 5 feet, minimum 5 feet away, and may even be able to have it in a garage.
What does the verbiage say on the can now?
It says for outdoor use only, fire code prohibits use or storage within 5 feet of buildings.
It's still for outdoor use. That works. You just need just some clarity, again, to help people understand what that means.
Rod.
I think the educational piece would, actually, probably something good can come out of this. You know, the fire marshal might be able to do a piece in the Talking Trash that comes out annually. So when's the next one coming out? Any idea?
It's coming out fairly soon.
Okay, so it might be very topical, and we can just always put that into Tim's canned questions. When people come in, that he'd be able to address that. But doing the education piece in the letter would probably work.
And there's always going to be a problem, I suspect, just because sometimes stupid just is endemic and never, ever quite goes away.
Tim's fixing to reorder some more 65-gallon single-stream totes, I think. You're running out. What are we going to do with what's stamped on them, Gary?
Well, it would seem to me, again, just off the top of my head, that you would say that something to the effect, if you...
Not for storage of?
Yeah, not for storage of combustibles and oily rags. And if so, it's got to be no closer than 5 feet from a building. Who knows?
Yeah, I think I could work with the fire marshal and come up with some language that clarifies that.
Yeah, and then
Anything that's new, newly ordered, that we can address that.
Right.
Probably just a better message. I mean, really, make it clearer so it's understandable and
Well, the
not,
first
not
statement is
quite
clear,
as so.
for outdoor use only. It's
Oh,
a
yeah,
garbage
that's
can.
cool.
So the next part is the helping people understand what they can and can't do, and that's not difficult. I know that you can get that one.
I think if we go for the educational message and try to work on the usage part of it more than the absolute location where this
Yeah.
bin can exist is the way to go around it. Well, not go around it, but make it usable for what it's intended.
Are the garbage and the single streams so stamped? Okay, it's not a single stream peculiar problem?
No.
Okay.
It's just that it's only just now got noticed,
Yeah.
along with every other issue we've had with the
Well,
recycle
it got
totes.
noticed because Mr. Reedner said it at that table at a city council meeting, and then the fire chief came out with a statement about they're not supposed to be in the garage and
Well, I
supposed to be
think
5 feet
Joe
out.
came out with something that he felt was
That was the code,
responsible, and that was he was doing what he was supposed to do. Now we're just dealing with the details, and it sounds like it's really small with what needs to be corrected to help people understand what's going on. So
Because mostly we're just interested in not having fires.
Yeah.
So that's the bottom line.
I'm interested in not having citizens literally stop me on the street hollering about their garbage can not being able to be kept either next to their house or in the garage.
I think it's great they're talking about it.
Well, we will bring a resolution
Yes.
back, some proposed resolutions. Thank you. Thanks,
Take
gentlemen.
out your sharpest pen, Rod.
Yeah.
Okay, next up, legislative update, Gary. Are you still
This
in?
is something,
Did Catherine hear you when you did the earlier one?
did you get the legislative update when I was?
I did it, when you did at the meeting, with the quarterly meeting,
No, no.
No,
today.
just before it,
no, I walked,
admin.
I'm sorry, I didn't stay, Gary.
Okay. I can either go over it with Catherine individually, or if you would like us to do it again,
You can do it individually.
happy to do it either way.
Because
Art and I heard it.
Yes, we did.
Okay?
And
And I do read.
Okay. Actually, I've got a really nice set in writing that I'd be happy to give you, and if you have questions.
Okay, that
more
sounds
than-
fine.
Okay? Thank
it's
you.
always interesting stuff from Boise. Okay,
With it.
next up is a report on the City Hall bike shelter from Alyssa Anderson.
The exciting bike shelter.
You know, I was feeling springy today,
I know.
so don't laugh at my unengineering presentation. So I felt flowers were appropriate. There's a little bit of a linkage here as we go. If you will recall, we applied for a grant, it's been about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, called a 5339 application through ITD, which allowed us to apply for funding for bus shelters, bike parking shelters, signage, and what do we call the bike sharrows, right?
Sure.
Sharrows, yes. And what I'm working on right now is the location and the environmental and the placement of the bike parking shelter. And the location that had been suggested and I think favored by most was right in front of, on 3rd Street by City Hall here. And to start out with, this is a sample shelter that the company that makes our existing bike shelters sent to us. And this is an 8x16 and would be,
Existing bus shelter.
or bus shelters, excuse me, which would be most likely the shelter that we would choose to go in the place that we've chosen. This is a picture of City Hall on 3rd Street and just kind of looking toward the parking lot. And the next one is just also that same spot, and now I'm going to bring you toward an imposed look of what a shelter would look like there on 3rd Street. And I have an additional view of it from this looking east also. And there's a couple of behind-the-scene things that we've needed to do to get our contract from ITD. We've needed to let them know how big the shelter is going to be, how it will be placed, and what the process will be for doing that. And so I first started out with going to the Historic Preservation Commission. I met with them at their last 2 meetings and went through the process, and they actually liked having the shelter in that location. They thought that the roof designs blended well together, and it had somewhat of a historic look. It is the same shelter that we've used on all of our bus shelters, and so I did get their blessing for it to be placed there. But as we were visiting a little bit about some of the other things that were going on at City Hall, we talked a little bit about what the vinyl graphics would look like on the shelter, and we have one downtown that has a historic graphic on it. That's the bus shelter down in Friendship Square. And so I'll be going to present to the Moscow Arts Commission and looking at what they would like to do. I think there's been a lot of talk about using the same kind of information that we did for the 100-year celebration for City Hall. And so we have a lot of the annual footprints of what that would look like. So it would be something easy we could do. Dwight had also brought to the Historic Preservation Commission a request to take a look at replacing the bench on 3rd Street. the wooden one that's out there now, and we may have some existing materials at the city shop. I guess they used to use a granite or a slate slab to do curbing and gutters with that they have, and we might be able to reuse that to make, I would say, probably a bench that would not weather. And so Tyler is looking at that with Nels and Dwight. And also, it's proposed to do a Y-scape plan in front of City Hall on the corner out where the sign is, on the west corner. And we could extend the Y-scape landscape in around the bus shelter. That is supposed to be
Bike
done.
shelter.
Or the bike shelter, I'm sorry. If you wouldn't remind me, I
Bounce
would say
between
it.
bus
Yeah.
and bike.
There's been so many bike shelters in my world, or bus shelters. So we've looked at integrating, bringing the Y-scape up around the bus shelter. We wouldn't be able to do it at the same time, the bike shelter, Walter, excuse me, because it will be, the Y-scape in front of City Hall is going to be done in time for our walk. But it would be a phase 2 that we would try to get done before the end of the fall.
Didn't you feel like that was the Y-scape versus grass was the place that the commission couldn't wrap their head quite around understanding how they would flow together?
Yes, and I've had some additional conversations with Nils and a couple of the other people there, and I think we needed to have a design that was more in size with what we were looking at.
Yeah.
And so we'll continue to work with that, but I just today kind of wanted to report on the status and how we're working to try to blend in some of the other aspects. And so some of the other suggestions were to possibly have some in the area behind where the bike shelter would be. There'll still be quite a large grassed area that we could use the Y-scape and possibly have some of the talking seats like the one we have out front by the picnic table, or do some other things, a smaller picnic table or some additional benches. And those types of amenities are eligible for funding under the 5339 also. We would want to make it ADA accessible, even though we may not have someone that is riding a bike, but it would still be a very good shelter for someone that was coming through on a wheelchair if the weather was inclement. So I just wanted to update you on that. I do have a letter from the Historic Preservation Commission with their blessing, and I'll be including that in the packet that will go to the State Historic Preservation and the Tribal Historic Preservation. And so these are the steps we needed to follow through on in order to have the state send us our contract. And so just reporting today.
So the 5339 grant has been approved.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the match on that?
It varies because we had a van in there that had a separate percentage of match, but if I recall, there was 10% and then 7, I think, 7 something,
7.5.
7.5 or something. I can't recall off the top of my head.
And what's the price of the bike shelter? Now you got me doing it. The bike shelter.
We had gotten estimates a couple of years ago, and the total project, not just for the shelter, but to install it and with amenities, we were looking at $20,000.
So about $2,000 from the city cash. This thing looks like it's got a life of its own, so I'm probably Johnny-come-lately to this. This is the first I've heard of it. I think, I didn't look today, but there's probably not but 1 or 2 bikes that are chained out there to the existing bike rack year-round.
Yep.
For a while, the city put some bikes there for employees to lose.
And we
to
will
use,
again.
But it looks like that's kind of gone away the past few summers, because I've noticed there aren't as many. With the exception of when Jim Boland rides his bike to City Hall and chains it out there, I just don't see that much bike usage here to build a whatever it was bike shelter when there are other places in town that have a lot more bikes there almost year-round, I think. So that was my question was, yeah, it's City Hall, yeah, we ought to lead the way.
Catherine?
That's a good question, because it was asked also at the Preservation Commission, and there was a lot of talk about all the bikes that you see at Friendship Square down by the hotel, permanently parked and all that kind of stuff. And then would the usage change as people knew there was available bike parking? And as a biker myself, there would be more parking. That's one of the hardest things. I usually hook up to a tree. So you're always looking for a place to put your bike.
It's illegal in Moscow.
Nevertheless, the point is, I think that there's people are looking for places to park and then would walk if they knew there was another place available. And
I think people would be more inclined to bike if they knew there was a place to store their bike when they got to the other end.
I don't know. I don't know. Just
well, and uncovered
My
makes a
thought.
big difference too. So it's nice having the covered option.
Gary?
Yeah, we've gone the full gamut. Covered bike parking, requirement for businesses. You recall that discussion several years ago. That was rejected by the businesses and the council. We talked about covered bike parking in the Jackson Street parking lot, which may yet occur, but we did not have, it wasn't built into it at that time, mainly because farmers market was still a big piece of it when that area was redone. I think Walter makes a very good point, and the reason that this was set like this was because it was City Hall kind of leading the way, so on and so forth. This has been in the works probably 6 years,
Yeah,
I'll bet,
6,
total,
yeah.
from that initial discussion of covered bike parking. Mayor Cheney was very concerned about, what about bike parking, covered bike parking? So at one
Don't
time.
misunderstand. It's not the covered bike parking. It's the location of the proposed
Understand.
location.
And this was an available public area that wasn't taking away available parking, number one. And it dovetails very nicely into the Wisescape concept, because, this is a kind of a unique area. We've talked about taking that lawn out at one time, using it for parking, but that's where we store our snow in the winter, when we have to plow the parking lot, so on and so forth. So it's going to have to be a fairly unique Wisescape anyway. But I can't argue with you. I think it was kind of felt, too, when we have meetings at City Hall, people might be more inclined to bike if they could park their bike under some cover.
But what you asked is exactly
So-
what came up.
Elisa?
Yes, and in talking to engineering and some of the different comments that had been made throughout time in our different studies with the Moscow on the Move study, people had asked about, could we have some covered bike parking, and that they, yes, would park a block away from downtown if they knew that they had a covered space to park their bike. We have a lot of people that still ride in the winter. And also the existing parking that's down in Friendship Square along the Moscow Hotel wall, a lot of those are abandoned bikes or that get parked there at the beginning of the semester and they don't move all year. And that's not the type of shelter that we're putting together. A lot of people have said if you put it down in Friendship Square, they're going to park their bikes there and they're not going to get moved all semester.
Yep.
And it's going to be really hard to not, to keep, people, a series of different bikes coming in and out so everyone can use it. And so with all the discussions that we've had over the many years, it's a need, and we were able to support it in the grant application. And I think with the Moscow on the Move study and some other things that we've had community members share with us, I think it's a supported project.
Do you know which budget the 2,000 might come out of? Has that been identified anywhere?
It's in this year's budget.
Yeah. It'll either be in general fund capital projects, or it will be in,
It's in capital.
is it in capital? Okay, street fund capital.
And it's identified under the 5339 grant. Basically, today was just an update to let you know that, we're working toward getting the contract on that award. And I just kind of thought it was neat to show you a little bit of how this project has evolved and the linkages that it's made. And I thought it's turned out really nice.
I do too. So good. Keep us posted.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is a status report on the Moscow School District Community playfields. What's happening?
Thank you, sir. Well, there's a lot of things happening. We are in the process of working with the school district on programming for the field, as well as programming a grand opening celebration. So that Dwight Curtis's folks, as well as the school district's folks, are working on that. We had a ARC meeting, an authorized representatives meeting last week to discuss finishing up the project. There are some issues that are being dealt with, including hoping to get some new pumps and some different, equipment to meet the needs of the irrigation system, which was apparently designed for a different type of irrigation than that field needs. Because it's a new field and because of the last year, for instance, with the pretty hot weather, it was having well overtaxed the system because that's not something you typically have. But again, you've got to be building it for those situations so that your field stays usable as much as it can be. So there's some swap out of that and some monies coming back because of the increase in design, so on and so forth. There's also equipment, padding for backstops, batting cages. There's discussions about scoreboards, so on and so forth. A lot of amenities that need to be done in order to make the ball fields usable. That equipment needs to be purchased, ordered fairly quickly so it can be available for the beginning of the season. We had, and the numbers I didn't bring with you, the ARC dealt with it on Thursday. There's sufficient monies in the contingency and in the construction fund to purchase all of that equipment for the opening of the project. There's also some fencing for batting cages and bullpens and that sort of thing. There are a couple things that are hanging in the balance right now. Suffice it to say that equipment, and hopefully we don't know where the scoreboards are going to be, what it's going to take to finish those off, but the equipment for the opening, the ARC informed staff to go ahead and move with that. The scoreboards won't be dealt with right away anyway because we can't get on the fields are soft enough that it probably won't be until sometime in the later summer when that's done. There is one amenity that we're looking at that everybody on the ARC pretty much agrees that we need, and that is a perimeter fence around the project. There is one around the project now. It's 6 feet high. It is a construction fence. It's a very low quality steel mesh. It isn't safe on top. It's got the exposed wires where they're wound together. It's too high, number one. It looks like a construction fence or a prison fence. That's a public area. It's not meant to be a prison. It's supposed to be inviting. So we are soliciting some quotes on a 4-foot safety fence that is built to withstand use, that will not only delineate, hopefully discourage people from misusing the property. It's not meant to have dogs on. It's not meant for people to take their pickups on if they're having fun or so on and so forth. So in order to keep it accessible, yet having some reasonable restrictions on it, additionally, it will help the school district to utilize it for district tournaments and those sorts of things. They have to have some way to control the gate. So those are issues that are being ticket sales, and that's what we're looking. And that will be important for community groups that are running tournaments as well. So it's a factor that could help the community as well. Suffice it to say, though, there is insufficient funds in the remainder of the construction fund to do that. We believe that we will need some additional funding from both the school district and the city to get that done. It really is kind of the final thing that needs to be done for that. It also would not be installed probably before a grand opening. And we've got some additional work to look at, firm costs and that sort of thing. But we think it will probably be somewhere in the realm of $15,000 to $20,000 per party. So we're looking at that. And again, those are just ballpark figures.
As it were. But does that include any potential return on revenue from getting rid of the construction fence?
Yeah, we're looking at perhaps trading that off. There is some interest in that. We have no use for it. The district has no use for it, so we'd salvage as much as we could in getting reimbursed for that.
Yeah, that is not, I'm on the ARC. That is not net of the salvage of the construction fence. They have made overtures that they would be interested in buying it back. I haven't heard a single number in terms of whether it's at 20% of what we paid for it or whether it's at 100%, and I don't know where it's going to fall.
Yeah.
It is net, the $20,000 for the city, $20,000 for the school district is net of a $50,000 contribution from the baseball association. You were not, well, neither one of y'all were on council when what I consider to be a commitment was made from that podium that if we could move the ball fields project forward, that the baseball association would contribute money toward the project. And we have looked back at them all the way through saying, don't forget, we would like to have some help here. So we still anticipate getting that.
So as we look forward to the opening, do we have any broad time frames in which this might be deciding to happen?
The grand opening?
Yeah, and the start of the use and the change in fencing sometime around the approximate same time.
Yeah, I can't speak to the fencing because I don't have any idea what the cost would be or what the time
Dwight
frame would
mentioned
be.
a date for his first use.
Yeah, he was thinking the beginning of April.
Was it beginning or end?
Yeah.
I don't remember.
So it'd be somewhere in that rough time frame. They're busy working on that right now. As soon as there's a coordination, we'll get back. One of the things that you have to be careful of is when you have a grand opening, people want to use it. And fields in Moscow, if you have a really wet spring, we work hard at, with keeping people off the field so they can still be used throughout the summer because they aren't all torn up when it's wet. So,
and there are a few corners in there that are pond-like with ducks in them.
Yeah.
So.
That's some questions. I wanted to ask you, are the PE classes going to be using the fields, the district?
They're certainly welcome to. They are, the way it was designed, our agreement with them is that the school district has priority for use for school purposes. Okay. And then outside of that, then the city essentially manages the.
And then, of course, we always talk about parking and travel there. So did that come up in the meeting about parking and
parking on the facility?
And then will people be able to park along the road when you get more people showing up at games? Because I can't remember whether the parking's allowed on that road or not.
There's
Can you
not
park
along
on either
Joseph
side of that
Street.
road?
No.
You think?
No. It was right sized.
I only
for the
drive
parking.
it daily, and I don't remember that it's marked no parking along Joseph, Gary.
Yes, it is. No parking.
I don't remember. It's marked no
No parking on the side of the street.
Thanks for
Bill.
catching me up.
There's a bike lane on the north edge of Joseph, so there is no on-street parking on Joseph.
Okay, all right.
There is about 218 parking spaces, I believe, in the parking lot, so we do have quite a bit of parking that was developed for the facility. If there was any overflow, there was discussion that the LDS Church across the street would make their parking lot available so long as it didn't conflict with any activities they would have happening. And then beyond that, you'd be on to other surrounding surface streets, so Meadow, El Cajon, a few others in the
Wouldn't
area.
allow it?
Yeah, correct. So that was why we did provide quite a bit of parking in the parking lot, because we
Is there
knew.
a time limit on any of that parking?
No.
Time limit as in, we will patrol for any unauthorized or extended parking
Neighborhood
use.
parking,
Yeah.
Like no
We'd manage it
overnight.
like any other park facility.
Okay, and then when I was there the other day, believe it or not, I was walking there. So the fences are good at keeping people out. You can tell it's like don't go in, but there's all that netting that's up.
Mhm.
But I just kind of wondered about wear and tear for the because you can't use all. Did that get put up and just not get taken down?
It was not taken down last fall because we were waiting for the final punch list inspection before we could take it down, and then the fields got too soft and wet. It's designed to be up year-round.
It is?
Yeah,
Okay.
the
Yeah, I just
the
didn't-
netting is designed to be up year-round. We were going to take it down in order to try to make it not appear as ready to use over the course of the last year, but we just didn't have a chance to get it down
And
before
not
warranty.
subjected to the weather when we didn't have to, but it didn't get down.
And then what were you saying about the baseball?
The baseball, what do they call them? Moscow Baseball Association
Association.
is talking about a sizable contribution to the field.
Their representatives approached us back when we were still negotiating whether or not this project was going to move forward. And they, at that time, committed that they had $50,000 that they would bring to the project if the city and the school district could come to an agreement. We came to an agreement, so we're considering that $50,000. And we've been told that $50,000 is available. So we're trying to integrate that in the best way into the project as well.
Sounds like a fence.
Well, actually, we're still short even after that contribution. So the total desired improvements that include the movable sports equipment, the scoreboards, the perimeter fencing is about $144,000 in total cost. And we have $48,000 left in construction funds, $50,000 from Musco Baseball Association, and then $10,700 coming back from the design team for the booster pump changeout. So we are about $34,000 short. That is about the cost of the perimeter fence, is about $34,000. So that's that remaining item that, both entities may need to consider contributing to for that final element. The perimeter fence was not considered in the original design of the facility, but it has been something the district has identified as desired.
So the purpose of my report today is just to inform you that it's coming forward, and we'll let you know more details when we have them.
No more details.
Thank you for the information.
Very good. And we've run out of items, unless there's anything else.
I would move to adjourn.
Catherine says yes, too. We're adjourned.